Hi, I'm Ankit, and you're watching the Daily News Simplified of 15th of December. Now we've picked up 6 important articles for our today's discussion. And the first article is on the issue of asymmetric federalism. Because the nature of India's federalism has been in news because of Supreme Court's judgment on Article 370. Whereas our second article is on the Indira Gandhi Peace Prize, as the award was announced yesterday and it was given to two individuals who have advocated for a non-violent resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Whereas the third article of the day is on the issue of membership of Europe or European Union, because the EU has opened its membership talks with Ukraine as well as Moldova. Now, moving on to the mains related discussion, and the first article is on the issue of logistics sector in India. Because a recent study by NCAER, it has highlighted that India has been able to reduce its logistical cost by a significant amount. Further, a second mains related article is on the debate around reservation. Because an article it appeared on Sunday in the Indian Express where the author has advocated for removal or revocation of these reservation provisions. Whereas our today's news article it highlights or it advocates why is reservation necessary, especially in Indian society. Now the third article of today is on the issue of India's action to tackle climate change. Because there's a debate in the Hindu newspaper which highlights whether India has been able to take steps in order to tackle the issue of climate change in a more effective manner. Hence, before begin our discussion, let me ask you to like this video, share this video with your fellow aspirants, as well as hit the subscribe button if you want to get notified with our future videos. Now, with this, let us start our today's discussion with this first article of the day, and it appeared in the Indian Express Explained section. Now, this news article deals with the type of Indian federalism. And as we know, India's federalism is asymmetric in nature. Now, why are we dealing with this particular news article? It is because UPSC in GS paper 2, it highlights issues and challenges pertaining to the federal structure. Further, Article 370, which gave the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir with special status, it highlighted that each and every state in the country, they are different in nature. Thereby, the nature of India's federalism is not symmetric or it is asymmetric. Now, what is federalism? Now, this federalism, it is a system of the government which divides the power of the country between different levels of government. For example, there's a central government which is in charge of the entire nation, whereas some of the provisions of the governance it is divided with constituent states of the Indian Union. Now there has been debates on what kind of federalism in which exists in India currently. For example, India's federalism has been termed as quasi-federal. And it is because India's federalism it is more tilted towards that of center rather than states. Because in many aspects, centers have more power when you compare with state governments. For example, there are more subjects in Schedule 7, which provides for division of power between center and state, as central list has more subjects than that with state list. Also, India's federalism has been termed as asymmetric. It is because the different states in the country they have different provisions. For example, Article 370 it provided the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir with special status. Further, there is also Article 371 which provides for various states such as Maharashtra, Gujarat as well as northeastern states with some kind of special powers. Hence, all of these states they are not equal in nature in the eyes of Indian Constitution, thereby making our federalism rather asymmetric in nature. Now let us discuss what are the features of Indian federalism. For example, there are multiple tiers of government, not just center and state, but also there's a provision for local governments under 73rd and 74th Amendment Act. Further, all these governments they have an independent source of revenue. For example, some kind of taxes they are collected by union government, whereas other taxes they are collected by state and local governments as well. Further, all these governments that are state as well as central government, they derive their powers not just from each other, but from the supreme law of land, that is Constitution of India. Further, this constitution it cannot be unilaterally amended by the central government itself, because the more important provision, especially which has bearing on the powers of the state, they can be amended by the central government only by the concurrence of 50% or half of the states. Further, if there's an issue between these levels of government, this issue will be resolved by an independent judiciary. Hence, all these features they highlight that Indian federalism, India is a federal polity in nature. Now, with this, let us discuss the model question. Now, why are we making this model question? Because UPSC in the past, especially in the year 2021, it has asked a question pertaining to federal character of the Indian Constitution. Hence, we have curated a practice question on similar lines. Consider the following statements. The first statement, different tiers of the government to govern the same set of citizens. And this statement is correct because India currently has different tiers of the government, that is union government, state government, as well as local government to provide for governance in the entire country. Also, these governments they have an independent source of revenue, and these are clearly defined as per the Constitution of India. Hence, this second statement is also correct. Whereas the third statement, fundamental provisions of the Constitution, they cannot be unilaterally changed. Again, this statement is correct because the significant provisions of the Constitution, they can be amended only after the central government or the act which is passed by the parliament, it is assented to by 50% or half of the Indian states. Now, how many of the above feature make the Indian federal in nature or Indian federal in character? Again, all of these three statements are features of the Indian federalism. Thereby, option C is the correct answer. Whereas the answer to this PYQ is concerned, here option A was the correct answer. Now, with this, let us move to the second article of the day, which appeared on page 16 of the Hindu newspaper. Now, this article, as you can see, highlights that Indira Gandhi Peace Prize was awarded to two individuals who have foreign origin. Now, these individuals, they got this award because they have advocated for a non-violent resolution of the Indo or the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Now, what is this Indira Gandhi Peace Prize? Now, this Indira Gandhi Peace Prize, it is awarded by Indira Gandhi Memorial Trust. Further, this kind of peace prize, it is awarded to both individuals as well as organizations. And why these individuals or organizations are awarded this kind of a prize? It is because they have advanced peace, development, or advocate for a new global economic order. Further, scientific discoveries, especially those discoveries which have an implication on humanity, these are also awarded by this Indira Gandhi Peace Prize. Now, to get this award, your published written work, it needs to be published. Further, the recipients of this award, it not just includes Indian nationals, but also persons who are international in nature, or for that matter, they are citizens of different countries. Now, with this, let us solve the model question. And we are dealing with this particular model question because UPSC have asked in the past, especially in the year 2021, a question related to Bharat Ratna and Padma Awards. Now consider the following statements. The first statement, it says that the Indira Gandhi Peace Prize is awarded annually to individuals promoting cultures, languages and tradition of India. Now this statement is incorrect because the award for individuals promoting cultures, languages and tradition, it is known as Indira Gandhi Award for National Integration, and it is Indira Gandhi Peace Prize. It is awarded to individuals who have advocated for international peace, development as well as establishment of a new economic global order. Now the second statement, the recipients of Indira Gandhi Peace Prize should be the citizen of India. Now, as it is clear from this news article, this award are not just given to citizens of the country, but also to citizens of other nations. Hence, this second statement also is incorrect. Thereby, the correct answer to this model question is option D. Whereas the PYQ is concerned, here the correct answer was option D. Now, with this, let us move to the third article of the day, which appeared in page 17 of the Hindu newspaper. Now, this article reports that the European Union, it has agreed to open membership negotiations with Ukraine as well as Moldova. Now, let us know more about what is this European Union and what are the criteria of its membership. Now, this European Union, it is a political as well as an economic union of 27 countries. Now, the origin of this European Union, it could be traced back to Maastricht Treaty, which was signed in the year of 1993. Now, the membership criteria of this European Union, it is derived from a set of an agreement which is called as a Copenhagen criteria. Now, the membership of this European Union, it is extended to nations who have a stability of institutions. For example, the institutions in the members country, they should advocate for democracy, establishment of rule of law, respect for human rights, as well as protection of minorities. Further, the economies of the member nations, it should have a functioning market economy. As the country, it should have the ability to cope up with the competitive pressure and market forces within and outside European Union. Further, the country who has become a member, it should also have the ability to for obligation of membership. As the country, it should effectively implement the rules, standards as well as policies that are favored by European Union law. And these policies should be political, economic as well as monetary in nature. Further, there's only one country, that is United Kingdom, which has left the membership of the European Union, and it was back in the year 2020. Because United Kingdom, it ceased to be the member of European Union effective from 31st of January of the year 2020. Now with this, let us solve the model question. With reference to European Union, consider the following statements. The first statement, it was formally established after the signing of Marrakesh Agreement. Now this statement is incorrect because Marrakesh Agreement, it was used to bring into the world the establishment of World Trade Organization. Whereas from this above discussion, we can safely say that it was Maastricht Treaty that led to origin of the European Union. Now the second statement, it states that the United Kingdom became the only country to leave European Union, which we know for the fact is a correct statement because United Kingdom, it left European Union in the year 2020. The third statement, it says the Copenhagen criteria must be met for accession of any country to the European Union, which again is a correct statement because the Copenhagen criteria, it makes the members who have a stable institutions, a market economy, and the ability to accede to European Union's rules and regulations, then those countries they are eligible for membership of European Union. Hence, from this above discussion, we can conclude that two statements are correct. Thereby, option B is the correct answer. Whereas the answer to this PYQ is option A, because it was European Union with which India agreed to start negotiations late of BTIA. Now let us move to the first mains article of the day, and it appeared in the it appeared in the Hindu newspaper. Now, this particular news article, which appeared in page 18, it highlights that the Indian government has been able to reduce the logistical cost in Indian economy. Now, why is this news significant and why are we covering this news in the mains related discussion? It is because UPSC in GS paper 3 specially relates to infrastructure has a significant portion which deals with transportation sector. Further, a question which is vaguely related to this topic, it appeared in the mains of the year 2014 and it asked us to discuss or critically evaluate the strategies of government regarding moving people and moving vehicles. Now, the logistical sector, you'll ask, what is this logistical sector? Let me explain this to you with the help of an example. Now, let us consider a manufacturing activity. For example, raw materials they are used by this particular factory, and these raw materials they are transformed into final products. Now, for the successful completion of this manufacturing activity, what you need to do is to supply these raw materials into these factories and also supply these final products to the end consumer. And how is this entire system of transportation takes place? It is transported with the help of logistics sector. Also, logistics, it is not just transportation of products, but it also relates to storage of these products. But when you increase the cost of this transportation and storage, it automatically leads to increase in prices of your final products. Hence, in order to reduce the final product's pricing, we need to reduce the cost which are related with logistics of the manufacturing activity. Hence, to make your products more competitive, not just in domestic but also in international markets, it is essential for a country to reduce its entire logistical cost. And this is what the Indian government it also wants to do. Further, this logistics sector it has grown leaps and bounds with the onset of digital economy. For example, when you order groceries online, it is delivered to you very quickly within a span of few minutes. Further, when you order your mobile phones through Amazon or Flipkart, it is also delivered to you in a fastest way possible. And also these companies they want to reduce their logistics cost. And this sector it is very huge. For example, back in 2016, this logistics sector it employed as many as 22 million people. Further, this logistics sector it is growing at a rate of 12% per annum. And by the year of 2027, this sector it is expected to provide employment to additional 10 million people. So you know that this sector it is very much significant from the economic point of view. However, India also has witnessed a high logistic cost. As this news article reports that previously India's logistics cost it was 14% of its GDP, which you can see is very high when you compare with other developed countries. For example, US it has about 9% of GDP on its logistics cost. Now, why do we need to reduce this logistic cost? And it is because if you are able to reduce your logistic cost by 10%, it will increase your exports by 5 to 8%. Hence, you can see any economy, it wants to reduce its logistics cost to increase its export as their products they become more cost competitive. Now, previously, India has also ranked poorly on the World Bank's Logistical Performance Index. Back in the year 2014, India's rank was 54. However, even now, when India has made significant improvements, in the year 2023, India's rank in the LPI, it stood at 38th ranking. Hence, you can see this is significant scope for improvement in India's logistics, and also India has a significant scope for improvement its performance in the logistical performance index. Now let us discuss what are the constraints that are faced by logistical sector in India. Now the first constraint, it is related to infrastructure development in the country. For example, in terms of warehousing, India, it currently has a capacity of about 109 million metric tons. And out of this capacity, private sector, it only accounts for about 20% of India's total warehousing capacity. Now, in order to have a more efficient logistical sector, it is quite natural for an economy like India to increase its warehousing capacity. But when it comes to increasing your capacity, the new projects they face regulatory hurdles. For example, companies who want to establish a warehousing capacity, they face hurdles in land acquisition as well as getting approvals from the required governments. Hence, these warehousing capacity it cannot be scaled up in a more quick manner, and it is because of the regulatory hurdle that these companies face. Further, these setting up of warehousing facilities as well as buying trucks which will be used to transport your goods, it also requires a substantial amount of investment. Hence, you can see any company which wants to undertake increased investment in logistics, it will be apprehensive because it has to face a high level of regulatory hurdle. And this is what is the main constraint related to logistics sector in India. And because of these infrastructure shortages and regulatory hurdle, what has led to increase in cost of logistics. As I've already highlighted, India traditionally has about 14% of its GDP on total logistics cost. And this is high when you compare with developed countries, especially US, which has about 8 to 9% of its GDP on logistic cost. Now further, India's logistics it is more inclined towards use of road transport because 60% of India's total logistics it is undertaken by road sector as against 31% of railways as well as 9% of water. And this is quite different from other developed nations. For example, developed nations they have about 25 to 30% logistics, and these logistics they flow through road sector, whereas railways and waterways they account for higher portions of logistics. For example, in developed countries, about 55 to 55% of logistics they are moved through railways, whereas 22 to 25% of logistics they are moved through waterways. And as you know, railways and waterways they are more cost efficient in nature. Thereby, the developed countries they spend less on their logistics cost when you compare those costs with that of India, because India it primarily utilizes road transport for logistical purposes. Hence, because of this tilted form of logistics, India has witnessed a significant higher cost on its logistics. Further, there are multiple authorities in India which are responsible for transportation. For example, if you transport something with road, it This thing is regulated by Ministry of Road and Highways of Union Government as well as state governments, which are responsible for maintenance of state highways. Whereas on the other hand, if you want to move your products through railways, you have to coordinate with Ministry of Railways. While thirdly, if you want to move your goods through sea or inland waterways, then you have to deal with Ministry of Shipping. Hence, you can see that there are different nodal authorities who are responsible for coordination. Thereby, it makes the coordination more difficult. Further, these agencies they have different levels of technologies, and these technologies they need not be necessarily interoperable in nature. Thereby, these interoperable technologies, which are used by different organizations, it has also created inefficiencies with respect to logistics sector. Also, India's logistics sector it is more fragmented and unorganized in nature. For example, there are more than 1000 companies who deal with logistics. But out of these 1000 companies, barely 10 to 15% they are organized players. Hence, what these organized players face is that they can adopt technology in a much more efficient manner when you compare them with unorganized companies. Hence, slow adaptation of new technologies, especially by these unorganized companies, it has led to inefficient logistics in the Indian economy. Further, these unorganized companies they also have low levels of environment sensitivity because they use transport which are polluting in nature, thereby increasing the pollution which is there in the Indian economy. And due to all these four factors, what has resulted is there is a problem in seamless movement of goods across the Indian economy. And this is also again exacerbated by the high border compliance as well as processing time, which you can see in the Indian ports. Thereby, these are the constraints, especially infrastructure related constraints, high cost of logistics, coordination issues between different agencies, as well as lack of or low environment sensitivity has led to problems in the logistics sector in general. Now, what are the steps that the government has taken in order to reduce the logistics cost in the Indian economy? Let us deal with these measures in the next slide. Now, the first measure and probably the most important aspect is that Indian government it enacted a national logistics policy back in the year 2022. Now, this logistics policy it provides an overarching framework for interdisciplinary, cross-sectoral as well as multi-jurisdiction logistics system. And the goal of this policy was to make our logistics more efficient and cost effective in nature. Now, this particular logistics policy, it came up with different targets. First is that it wanted to reduce the cost and also it wanted India to improve its performance in the World Bank's Logistic Performance Index as this policy it wants to bring India among 12, top 25 rankings. Further, this policy it also wants to increase the technology adoption by Indian logistic players. And in this regard, several states, for example, as many as 22 states, they have enacted a state logistics policy. Hence, you can see that with bringing of national logistics policy, not just the central government, but also the state governments, they have become more aware in order to reduce their logistics cost. Further, this policy it also brought forward what was known as a unified logistics interface program. As this platform, it is responsible for digital integration of the entire logistics sector, where users they can log in into this particular platform and access to various service providers. Further, in order to reduce the cost of credit For the logistics sector, what the government did was that it granted the infrastructure status to India's logistics sector. And with this granting of infrastructure status, the companies who want to seek access to credit, they have become eligible for a long term credit at a much more competitive rate. For example, these companies they can access larger amounts through loans as external commercial borrowings. Further, they can access to longer duration funds from companies such as insurance companies as well as pension funds. Also, companies who want to seek access for logistical purposes, they can get credit or borrow from Indian Infrastructure Financing Company Limited or IIFCL. Hence, you can see by granting the infrastructure status to the logistics sector, what the government wants to do is that it wants to provide the logistics sector with a cheap and well as longer duration funding. Further, there was also a transformation in the India's indirect taxation system, and this was due to enactment of goods and services tax. What this GST did was that it enabled India to have a one nation, one market policy. And with this, it enabled the seamless movement of goods across the country. And this was facilitated by what was known as a e-way bill. Because companies who are responsible for transportation of goods across Indian states, they can generate what was known as a e-way bill, and it provided them with ease of movement of their goods. And with introduction of this e-way bill, India was able to reduce the truck turnaround time by as much as 20%. Hence, by reducing the truck turnaround time, what was government able to do was that it was able to provide seamless transportation of goods at a much more lesser cost. Further, Indian government it also created a separate logistic division within the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. And this was done after the recommendation of the Bibek Debroy committee. And by creating a separate logistics division, what the government signified to the industry that it focused especially on logistics as a core component of its policy making. Further, India has also undertaken of infrastructure development through its multiple schemes. For example, government wants to develop as many as 35 multimodal logistics park. Further, under Bharatmala Yojana, India has also want to create its world class level of road infrastructure, and it also wants to create a world class level of coastal infrastructure through that of Sagar Mala program. And with these particular schemes, what the government wants to do is that it wants to create infrastructure which will facilitate the logistics or transportation of goods in the Indian nation. Further, government has also brought what was known as logistics ease across different states index. And using this index, logistical development as well as competitiveness across various states was measured. And it signifies the development of cooperative or competitive federalism. Because India states they will compete among themselves in order to provide more efficient and cost effective logistics. Hence, these were the measures that were undertaken by the government in order to facilitate or provide a much more efficient logistics in the country. But what should be the other measures that should be approved by the government in order to further reduce India's logistical cost? And the first recommendation in this regard is that there's a need to create a national logistics e-marketplace. Just like e-commerce platform, a user who wants to undertake transportation of the goods, they can log in into this e-marketplace and they can get offers from various companies in order to reduce their logistics cost. And when the company is able to choose the best logistics provider, it will provide an integrated as well as a common platform for all logistics players, because all logistic players as well as persons who want to transport goods, they will be available at one common platform. Further, what India needs to do is to further reduce its logistical cost, and the most effective way to do that is to optimize the current modal mix of India's transportation sector. As I've already highlighted, India's modal mix is currently tilted in favor of road transport. However, in order to reduce the logistics cost, what the Indian government wants to do is that it should facilitate the transportation of logistics over railways as well as waterways. Because these two modes, especially railways and waterways, they provide for a much more efficient logistics. Further, government it should also promote adoption of advanced technologies by the logistics players. And in this regard, use of artificial intelligence, big data analysis, as well as blockchain technologies, it can be used to further optimize as well as increase the traceability of Indian logistical sector. Further, what the government should do is that it should fast track its infrastructure creation, because currently, as we have understood that Indian government it has undertaken schemes such as Bharatmala Yojana, Sagarmala Yojana, as well as multimodal logistics park to fast track the infrastructure creation. But further, what the government should do is that it should facilitate the infrastructure creation, especially by private players. And in this regard, government should undertake reforms in land acquisition as well as provide these private players with cheaper credits. Further, India should also look to attract investments, especially that of private sector, because currently most of the investment that is made in the infrastructure sector, it is done by government itself through specially national infrastructure pipeline. But when you want to increase the investment of private sector, it will increase the level of Indian investment in the logistics sector. Further, government it should also focus in order to provide sustainable logistics, and this can be done by making the logistics sector more or less carbon intensive as well as energy efficient. Because in longer run, an efficient logistical sector it will contribute to India's net zero target, as India it wants to achieve a net zero carbon emission by the year 2070. Hence, by providing or formulating a national logistical e-marketplace, reducing its logistical cost further, adoption of advanced technologies such as big data analysis as well as blockchain, and fast tracking its infrastructure creation, as well as attracting private sector investments in the logistics sector, then India can further be able to reduce its logistics cost. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on logistics sector in India. Now, with this, let us move to the second mains related article, which appeared in page 11 on the Indian Express. Now, on Sunday, there was this article in Indian Express which highlighted that India needs to do away with its reservation policy. And our today's article on reservation is an reply to the Sunday article. And the today's article, the author of this article, she has advocated for preservation of these reservation policy. Now, why are we dealing with this particular news article? It is because UPSC in GS paper 2, it has provided a significant provision which provides for affirmative action policies. As these affirmative action policies, for example, reservation, it provides for reservation of seats in not just educational institution but also in government jobs for persons who belong to marginalized community, especially scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, as well as other backward classes. Now, a question related to scheduled caste, especially National Commission for Scheduled Caste, it was asked in the mains of the year 2018. So you can see this topic is particularly important from mains point of view. Now, this Constitution of India, it provides for reservation, and this is given in multiple articles in the Indian Constitution. For example, Article 15 of the Constitution, especially the subsection 4, it deals with reservation for advancement of socially and educationally backward classes of citizens or for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. And this particular article, that was Article Subclause 4, it was used by 93rd Constitutional Amendment Act to provide for reservations for other backward classes in educational institutions. Further, as per Article 16, both subsection 4 as well as subsection 4a, it is used to provide reservation for people who belong to marginalized community, especially backward classes of citizens with reservation in the services of the state. Further, Article 46, which forms part of directive principles, it is also used as this provision. It directs the state to promote educational and economic interests of scheduled caste, scheduled tribes as well as other weaker sections. And India's reservation policy is a response by the government as its obligation in the DPSP requires the government to provide for reservation. Also, this reservation not just in educational institutions and jobs, but also in the legislatures as well as local government in India. For example, Article 330 of the Constitution, it provides for reservation of seats belonging to people from scheduled caste, scheduled tribes in the Lok Sabha, which is also known as House of People. Further, Article 332, it provides for reservation of seats for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes in legislative assemblies of Indian states. Further, the local government, that is PRI, it is provided with reservation of seats for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, especially in Panchayati Raj institutions. Whereas the municipalities are concerned, it is provided by reservation of seats with Article 243T. Hence, you can see Indian Constitution, it elaborately provides for reservation not just in government jobs as well as educational institutions, but also in legislatures at union, state as well as representation in the local level. Now, naturally, this issue has become a controversial issue because some section they think that this reservation it is much more important for the members of the marginalized community. Whereas on the other hand, there are few people who want to do away with these reservation policies. Now, what are the controversies or the issues which are associated in and around reservation? For example, people who want to do away with the reservation, they think that this reservation provision it goes against the principle of meritocracy. Now, what is this meritocracy? According to meritocracy, any people they should be rewarded just by their hard work or by their ability itself. Whereas on the other hand, the reservation it provides people with benefits related to their social background. And the critics of this reservation policy, they think that if people are not advocated or benefited for their hard work and ability, and they are benefited for social background, it goes against the principle of meritocracy. While what the members who are against the reservation, they feel that this meritocracy is a essential component. However, what they forget is that a merit, that is their ability of a people, it is also determined by their social background. For example, if a person who belongs to a privileged community, then that person will have a significant improvement in their economic and their educational background. Hence, because of their social background or privileged social background, members of the privileged community they have greater access to economic as well as educational resources. Whereas on the other hand, people who belong to marginalized section they lag behind these members of privileged section in terms of their educational and economic achievement. Hence, with reservation, what the state wants to do is that it wants to create a level playing field between that of privileged section as well as members of the marginalized community. Now, the critics of the reservation system they also argue that the reservation policies they had limited impact, and this limited impact is much more prominent in the case of other backward classes. Because since the benefits of reservation they were extended to the members of OBCs, it has argued that these benefits they are cornered by only a subsection of the OBC communities. For example, according to G. Rohini Commission report, about 10 subcasts of OBCs out of total 1900 subcasts, there are about 26,033 communities who are registered as OBCs in the union government's list. And out of these total 2,600 communities, only 10 sub communities they have cornered as many as 25% of benefits which are given to these OBCs. Hence, the critics of reservation they argue that the reservation policies they have had limited impact. Further, the advocates of removing reservation they also argue that this reservation policy they do not address what is known as a creamy layer, because there is a subsection in the marginalized community who have previously benefited from reservation policies, and according to some people these communities they have already gained some kind of a parity with other forward classes. Whereas on the other hand, there are non-creamy layers who require reservation much more than that of creamy layers. Hence, as India's reservation policy, especially that of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, it does not recognize an existence of a creamy layer. Hence, the critics of reservation policy they argue that the reservation policies they've had a limited impact. Further, the dominant section in many of the Indian states, for example, Marathas in Maharashtra, Patels in Gujarat, as well as Jats in Haryana, they have demanded reservation by recognizing themselves as OBCs. However, there's a significant problem in granting the recognition of OBCs to these dominant castes, because these dominant castes they have a substantial ownership of land in their respective states. Hence, and also this kind of an economic impact makes them politically dominant. Hence, you can see that there has been a demand from dominant section which creates the apprehension around this reservation policies. Now, these demands from dominant section they have been utilized by politicians in order to gain benefits in the upcoming elections. Hence, you can see that the demand of these dominant section they have been nourished as well as perpetuated by members of the political caste in order to gain a political benefit out of this issue. And what this has created is that it has already exacerbated the total amount of disturbances or issues in the Indian society, because Indian society it is already divided based on caste, and when this division it is further perpetuated for the political benefits, it creates further diversions in the Indian society. Also, there are debates around if there is a need to extend these reservation policies. For example, in general, minorities in India, in few states, they are granted with some kind of reservations. But in general, when entire nation is concerned, there is no significant provision for reservation for these minorities. Also, there are demands from various sections by extending the reservation in the private sector itself. For example, in states such as Andhra Pradesh as well as Haryana, the locals they are demanding reservation for locals in the private sector. However, the policies, especially that of Haryana government recently, it was struck down by the High Court of Haryana and Punjab that the state government it cannot enact a local reservation policy. Hence, you can see that the critiques of reservation policy they argue that the reservation policy they go against meritocracy have had limited impact, especially with relation to OBCs, and the reservations they have increased demand from the dominant section in the society. Further, these demands they have been nourished by the political class, which has further perpetuated the already divided Indian society. Also, there have been debates around extending these reservation policies to minorities as well as private sector. Hence, what should be the way forward in order to make this reservation policy more inclusive as well as equitable in nature? Now, the first recommendation in this regard is to ensure effective implementation of the reservation policy. And in this regard, let us consider the G. Rohini Committee recommendation on subcategorization of OBC. Because this committee, which was headed by Justice G. Rohini, it advocated subcategorization of OBCs into three segments. And the third segment, which will be there for the marginalized communities among these OBCs, as these communities they should be provided with greater benefits as far as reservations for OBCs are concerned. Hence, this subcategorization it ensures effective or more equitable implementation of the reservation policies. Further, there is also a need to enhance or expand the scope of India's reservation, because currently most of the reservation policies they are just based on the issue of caste. However, recently Indian government it enhanced or expanded the scope of reservation for economically weaker sections. Further, there is also a need to bring reservations for other marginalized communities such as transgenders. Also, there is a need to provide merit based affirmative actions. And in this regard, educational institutions they can have different diversity targets, scholarships, as well as mentorship program for members or students of underprivileged backgrounds. Hence, by ensuring diversity in the educational institutions, providing scholarship as well as mentorship to people or students of underprivileged backgrounds will ensure that the only the meritocracy is forwarded, and not just the reservations are not just provided to the members of a certain social background. Further, the core issue of the reservation is that some section, especially the underprivileged section, they have a lack of access to educational resources. Hence, what we can do is that provide quality education, especially to the members of marginalized community. Because providing educational, especially at primary as well as secondary level, will ensure the educational development of the marginalized community, and it will help achieve them parity with other sections of the Indian society. Also, this issue around reservation as well as caste based differentiation is a sensitive issue. Hence, in general, Indian society it should ensure that there is a increased social awareness among the people, because when people are aware of the kind of hardships that the members of the marginalized community face, then they'll be able to recognize that the debates around reservation are much more needed. And hence, it will make people accept that this should be a kind of state support, especially for the members of the underprivileged or marginalized section. Hence, by ensuring effective implementation of the reservation policies, expanding the scope of reservations beyond caste to economic as well as gender based reservations, providing merit based affirmative action, especially by ensuring diversity, scholarship, and mentorship to meritorious students, ensuring quality education for the marginalized, as well as increased social awareness, will help us reconcile to the provisions of the Indian reservation policies. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on debates around reservation. Now, with this, let us move to the last mains related article, which is on India's efforts towards climate change. Because there is a debate in the Hindu newspaper which recognizes, has India made an adequate effort towards tackling the climate change? And why are we discussing this particular topic? It is because UPSC in GS paper 3 it deals with environment and biodiversity. Further, in the mains of the year 2017, a question specially appeared on climate change and its effect on India. Hence, India, being a growing economy, it needs to ensure a substantial amount towards tackling of climate change, but it also should ensure the adequate economic development of the country. And how is India trying to deal with climate change? It is because India in UNFCCC, that is Conference of Parties for Climate Change, in its 26th meeting, it gave forward what was known as 5 elements of its climate change policies, and it was known as Panchamrits. Hence, this Panchamrit, they serve as a guiding light towards India's action in order to tackle climate change. Now, the first element of this Panchamrit was India, it wants to reach the 500 gigawatt non fossil fuel energy capacity by the year 2030. And in this regard, India wants to increase its non fossil fuel energy capacity generation. And the first element is India brought forward a national solar mission. And as in this solar mission, India wants to increase its solar power generation capacity. And by the year 2023, especially June 2023, India is able to achieve more than 70% of its solar power generating capacity, which you can see is a substantial improvement. Further, India government, it also launched what was known as a National Bioenergy Program. And this National Bioenergy Program, it has 3 components. First, that there are substantial amount of household, industrial as well as agricultural waste. And these waste, they are utilized to produce energy. And the energy which is conserved in form of compressed biogas, it is then used to generate or power our vehicles as well as providing a fuel for cooking. And in this regard, Indian government it brought forward a scheme which was known as Satat scheme, which was an abbreviation for sustainable alternative towards affordable transportation. And according to this scheme, what the government wants to do is that it wants to target the production of 15 million metric tons of compressed biogas by the year 2023. Further, India also wants to encourage the production of biomass. As the biomass, especially from agricultural sector, it can be used to generate or create fuels which will be used in industries. Further, India has also provided scheme for enhanced financial assistance in order to generate biogas. India, it extends benefits to factories who are setting up biogas plants for about 1 to 2,500 cubic meter capacity per day. Hence, you can see through National Bioenergy Program, what the government wants to do is that it wants to promote the use of biofuels. Further, with National Solar Mission, what the government has done is that it has increased the India's solar power generation capacity to more than 70 gigawatts. Further, the second element of India's Panchamrit is that India wants to create or generate 50% of its energy requirement from renewable energy itself. And in this regard, you can see that India has a significant renewable energy deployment, which you can see that India has increased its solar power capacity, wind power, hydropower, as well as bioenergy capacity. Further, India has also undertaken significant developments in order to generate green hydrogen as well as green ammonia. And with this, India has become third largest renewable energy generating economy in the entire world. Because in the year 2022, India has an installed capacity of 40% of its total power capacity, which was done from renewable energy. Now, the third element of India's Panchamrit is that India wants to reduce its total projected carbon emission by that of 1 billion tons up till the year 2030. And in this regard, what the government has done that it has brought forward many policies. For example, there was this national mission for enhanced energy efficiency. And in this scheme, India introduced a performance, achieve, and trade scheme which was there for industries in order to reduce their power consumption. Further, India also brought forward what was known as National Mission for Green India. Because in this mission, India wanted to increase its forest cover by that of 5 million hectares, and it also wants to increase the quality of its existing forest by additional 5 million hectares. Hence, you can see that the increased greenery in India will help India reduce its carbon emissions. Further, India also wants to make its agriculture more sustainable in nature because by introducing schemes such as systemic rice implementation scheme or introducing organic cultivation, what India wants to do is that it wants to reduce the emissions which are there by agricultural sector. Because this agricultural sector, it is responsible for emission of greenhouse gases, especially that of methane. Hence, by making the agriculture more sustainable, what the government wants to do is that it wants to reduce its total carbon emissions. Further, India has also undertaken certain energy efficiency measures. For example, India brought forward an energy conservation building code, which was there to increase or reduce the emissions by commercial buildings. Also, Indian government it introduced an Ujala LED program because utilizing this scheme, India distributed as many as 360 million LED bulbs to households. Further, as many as 10 million street lights in India, it was converted into LED lights. And what this measure wants to do is that it wants to make the India's energy sector more efficient. Hence, if less energy is generated, it will automatically reduce the carbon emissions, which is substantial by the India's energy sector. Further, the fourth element of India's climate change policy, it was the reducing carbon intensity of the economy by as much as 45% till the year 2030. And this reduction will take place from 2005 level. And in this regard, India has wanted to reduce the use of energy as also India wants to increase the renewable energy production. And is that how has India promoted renewable energy production? Is that it has reduced or eliminated the interstate transmission charges, especially with related to renewable energy. And this was waived off up till the year 2025. Further, India also obligates the power distribution companies to purchase some kind of energy from the renewable energy sector. Hence, these are known as renewable purchase obligations, which are there on distribution companies. Further, India also wants to set up ultra mega renewable energy parks, especially in Gujarat as well as Rajasthan. As developers who will develop these ultra mega renewable energy park, it will further the renewable energy generation capacity in India. Also, what the government did was that it solarized the agricultural pumps in the country through PM Kusum Yojana. Because agricultural pumps, which are primarily driven by diesel, they then will be solarized by this scheme, thereby reducing the amount of emissions by the India's agricultural sector. Further, India also introduced a green energy corridor scheme, which provided for an efficient transmission of renewable energy across the power grids in the entire country. Hence, by eliminating the interstate transmission charges, increasing the RPO obligations, facilitating the construction of ultra mega renewable energy parks, solarizing its agricultural sector, as well as facilitating the transmission of green energy. With this, India wants to reduce its overall carbon intensity. Now, the fifth and the final element is that India wants to achieve the net zero emissions, and it wants to do so by 2070. Now, there are debates around fossil fuels that many countries, especially the developed countries, they want to phase out the use of fossil fuels, whereas some countries they favor phasing down the use of fossil fuels. However, India, it is specially not agreeing to phasing out the use of fossil fuels because India's per capita energy consumption is quite low when you compare it with developed countries. Also, India has a significant amount of poor or below poverty line people. Hence, in order to develop the India's economy, India needs to use the fossil fuels for its energy requirements. Also, in the last COP, that was COP 27, the agreement it agreed to phase down the use of fossil fuels. However, in the latest COP, that was COP 28, which recently concluded in Dubai, the text of the agreement it also did not mention the use of phase down. Rather, what the text mentioned that the countries they should look to transition towards a more energy efficient or renewable energy targets. Hence, India it wants to be an active player to tackle the climate change, but India it also has an obligation to increase its energy requirements. Hence, in this regard, what India has done is that it has pushed its net zero emission targets from 2050 to that of 2070. But India, being a responsible player in the climate change negotiation, it also wants to reduce the use of carbon emissions, especially with that of National Green Hydrogen Mission. What government intends that it wants to create a 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen generating capacity per annum by the year 2030. Further, as I've already highlighted, government has brought forward this PM Kusum Yojana, which wants to solarize the agriculture pumps in India. Hence, Indian government it has given a target of 34.8 gigawatt of energy generation through this solarization pumps. Further, India also wants to undertake solarization of its rooftop. And with this, India has given a target of 40 gigawatt of power generation through this solar rooftops. Hence, you can see across all the five elements of India's Panchamrit policy, India has aimed to reduce its carbon emissions by promoting renewable energy or promoting the use of renewable energy for industrial as well as transportation sector. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on India's actions to tackle climate change. And with this, I request you students to ask your doubts in the comment section below. But before concluding our today's discussion, I also want to highlight that the issues which are there in COP 28 and its all its intricacies, it will be dealt in detail by Gaurav sir in a DNS special session which will be held on Monday, and this will go live at 3 p.m. on Monday. So interested students, they can log on to the YouTube and Raus IAS channel for this special DNS session on COP 28. And I am waiting for your comments section, as you can students can ask the doubts. Sir, what is this Panchamrit strategy that you mentioned? Now the student who's asking his doubt, he can realize that India brought forward its Panchamrit policy as its nationally determined contribution. And this Panchamrit policy, it was introduced by the Indian government in the 26th meeting of the COP. Now, according to this policy, what the government wants to do is that it wants to increase its non-fossil fuel generation capacity. It wants to generate its energy requirement, and 50% of this energy requirement utilizing renewable energy. It wants to reduce its total carbon emissions. It wants to reduce the carbon intensity of its economy, and it wants to achieve the net zero emissions by the year 2070. So, the student who has asked this doubt, with this Panchamrit policy, India intends to tackle the issue of climate change. And this Panchamrit policy, it suggests a way forward on how India should tackle its climate change. Now, this was all for today's discussion in our Daily News Simplified. And if you have more doubts, you can ask me the doubts in the comment section below. But also, don't forget to like the video, share this video with your fellow aspirants, as well as hit the subscribe button. With this, sorry, with this, let me bid you good night.